Good afternoon.
There you are. It was a
Right.
green screen. Good seeing
How are
you.
you guys?
I'll introduce myself first. I'm Marty Cheek, the publisher of Morgan Hill Life and Gilroy Life newspapers. And this is Isabel Sola-Aga, who's going to be the writer on this project. And just to let you know, I think Ricky's told you we're going to record this. I think it's a really important story for our local readers in Morgan Hill, Gilroy, and San Martin to know. So let you introduce yourself. You're the Northern California Regional Director. What does that mean?
That's right. So as the Northern California Regional Director, I help lead the project from San Francisco down through San Jose and South County, and then all the way across the mountains out to the Central Valley. The way our organization is set up broadly is we're a state agency, so our headquarters is in Sacramento, as most state departments are. And then we have 3 regions. So Northern California, which is the one that I lead, and then I have a counterpart in the Central Valley and similarly in Southern California for those stretches of the system. And of course, we end up collaborating across the different regions and across the entire state on how the entire program has to all fit together. But that's this role.
So it's a huge project. You got a lot of places keeping your head there.
This project tends to certainly be on a scale that few other things in transportation tend to match up with. And just in our region, we have 5 different counties, 22, I believe, different cities. Obviously, have some unincorporated areas along the way, like San Martin, and the number of different Bay Area transit agencies and everybody else that's involved. It's a pretty wide group of communities and stakeholders and folks interested in what we're doing, and we're trying to do our best to reach them and share information and get the good word out about the project.
That's fantastic. So I think everybody's kind of curious, what is your timeline for figuring connecting all these places? And California is huge and our geography is not easy. How are you?
Sure. So we're in construction right now in kind of a few different places in the state. In the Central Valley, we have over 100 miles already being built today, and we can talk about progress in construction. We've had lots of ramp up and growth there, and so even what's behind me, this is the Fresno Trench. That's actually already been built. This, we still have to get the train in there and a few other things, but the box is there already. So lots of progress happening there, as well as on the Caltrain electrification, which is electrifying the corridor from San Jose north to San Francisco that we're partnering with them on. But then the kind of key stretches that part in the middle, right, to connect from Silicon Valley to the Central Valley, and that includes all of the South County pieces. And so right now we're going through the environmental clearance process. And so we just released the draft environmental document from San Jose to Merced on April 24th. So that lays out all the different alternatives, all the environmental analysis, proposed mitigations, all of that is covered in those documents. And that's available for public review through June 23rd. So that's when the public comment period closes. From there, we take every comment that we get back from all the thousands of people that might look at this ultimately. And we'll be spending about the next year responding to every single comment that we get, making any necessary changes in those environmental documents, and then bringing that back to our board of directors basically about this time next year for approval. And what that allows us to do is then move towards final design and into construction. There's still more work to do, in terms of advancing engineering, moving utilities out of the way, acquiring a right-of-way, doing geotechnical investigations and other things to get to construction. But sort of those are the next steps after environmental, and ultimately the goal for San Francisco to Bakersfield to be completed by 2031. So we have about 10 years to do all of that from where we are today. And then getting down to Los Angeles would be shortly thereafter. By then we would probably have trains running in the Central Valley on the part that's already under construction as an interim service, but getting across the mountains is of course one of the big challenges in helping to connect these 2 major parts of our state together.
Right. Amazing. So 10 years, SF to Bakersfield.
That's the plan. A lot has to, there's a lot of work we have to do. There's more funding we're going to need. There's, a lot of steps to get there, but that's the path that we're on, and that's the schedule we're working to maintain.
Boris, let's talk a little bit about the funding. I mean, you had, I think, roughly $10 billion that was in the initial bond, and I think the government was going to provide a complimentary grant. But what's happening in terms of, is there enough funding to make this happen? You have enough private investing that's going on, and what's the status in terms of the funding?
Sure. Always a good question. And, I think the thing to realize is that this program has never been fully funded. So when the voters voted and you pointed out that it was $9 billion for high-speed rail, there was $950 million for connecting projects in that bond act. That was about a fifth of the cost at the time. And it said, the voters told us, for every dollar you want to spend on construction, you have to find a dollar somewhere else. And at that point, there were no other available funding sources. And so since over the last 10 years, what we've been able to do is match every dollar from that bond act, dollar for dollar. So that's included federal funds that we got after the last recovery act, as well as state cap and trade funds that were appropriated in 2014 to the program. And so right now we have about a third of the total cost. We will obviously need more over time. And so we'll have to repeat our, find 10 billion to match it with another 10 billion over the next, 10 years or so as well to make that happen. In terms of potential sources, one thing that's encouraging, even as, we sit here today, the federal government just introduced their next transportation, 5-year transportation bill in the House. And that one includes about $20 billion for high speed and higher speed rail. And so we certainly, over that 5-year period, and so we certainly see the need for the federal government to continue to step up in ways that it hasn't fully yet on this project. Historically, we've seen the federal government play, a 30, 50, or even highways 80 or 90% share of these large transportation projects. Right now, they're about 5%, and California is doing the heavy lifting. So we certainly see that as an encouraging sign. We'll see, that legislation. Maybe before COVID, I would have guessed that probably would need a new administration, perhaps. But in today's world, there's long history of recovery from hard economic times, including, going all the way back to the WPA and things like that, of using large infrastructure projects as one means of stimulating economic recovery in hard times. And, I don't think any of us have seen kind of what the last, the economic hardship that's being caused in the last even just few months. Obviously, there's also a massive public health crisis that goes with that as well. So there's multiple hits going on right now.
So the total cost it's always fluctuating. I'm not quite sure. What is the estimated total cost right now? And the second question is, are private investors interested in participating in this?
Sure. So the full cost of what we call the phase 1 system, which is what the voters defined for us, from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim, is about $80 billion is sort of our central point estimate. Now, we've also in our business plan laid out a range around that because as we've learned and we've seen from other projects, as you're going through all the different planning steps, those costs can fluctuate both up and down depending on, you might have a favorable bid climate driving bids lower than you anticipated. You might have issues in construction or different route alignments that might drive your costs up. And so in many parts of the system, we still have different alternatives, for example, that we're studying that have a range of costs around that. So the full range that we've said is 80 is sort of our best guess, but it could be from 63 to 98 is what we've bracketed that with. And sorry, that's a long-winded explanation. And then on the private side, what we've set out is that what we see kind of as and what we've heard back from the market is that the private investment will be interested in basically the operations and high-speed rail systems around the world end up making money from operations after you've made the original capital investment into building the system. And so what we're trying to do is basically get to service running, reduce the risk so they know kind of can more accurately forecast ridership and their revenues, and then issue a long-term concession for that operation that will help then build more of the system over time. And so that's kind of where we've laid out as, so we definitely see that the private sector will have a major role in, helping finance the program, but that's likely after the first phase kind of gets into service.
I see. Boris, I have a question. Do you think that COVID-19 is going to impact your riders and the demand for the high-speed rail?
I think it's a little bit too early to tell. Obviously, transit systems across the country have been hit really hard with, ridership down as much as 90% or even more at times, as people have been staying at home. I think some of that will, we still have a number of years until we're ready to run service, and so what, if any, effect COVID will have over that kind of time period, I think in part will obviously depend on, things like development of vaccines and therapeutics and other things that, it's hard to sit here and say yes or no. Obviously, to say that COVID isn't having an impact even in what we're doing today would be an understatement. I think it's, a global pandemic impacts everything everyone is doing, frankly. And that's why we're doing this on this wonderful platform, but perhaps we would be doing this differently under different circumstances. And so for now, we're obviously every day monitoring, what COVID means for the program, and we'll be, continuing to report on that and put out kind of, what effect it's having for us. We have, as I mentioned, been able to maintain construction in the Central Valley. We've instituted some pretty vigorous, safety, social distancing, hygiene, and other measures together with our contractors and the labor unions working out there. And so our construction has actually been able to continue to ramp up as the pandemic has hit. So the short-term effects are, we're doing our best to manage those. The longer-term effects, I think we'll see over time.
Gotcha. Yeah, a lot of questions these days, one thing after another as well. I did read that you guys had recently let go some consultants. What's that? Why did you decide to do that, and what does it mean for the project? And
I think that, and I'll give you a little bit of sort of personal history on some of this stuff as well, because what we're doing is sort of, as the project has matured, so has the organization. And what we're doing is replacing a number of positions that have been outside consultants with more permanent state staff, effectively, and trying to reduce costs along with that. So it's not, there's a cost saving measure associated with it, as consultants can be quite expensive. But this, one of the key challenges that this organization has faced, and I've been working on the program since 2011. When I started, at that point, there were 16 state staff, running this massive infrastructure project. Now, over my 9 years on the program, I think we're now approaching 300 state staff at this point, managing a much larger, project team, and then obviously construction and other, contractors doing lots of work across the program. And so this is, there have been multiple chunks where we've transitioned various functions from being outsourced to private firms supporting us when we weren't ready to take those on, to then taking those over as core state functions for the agency. And so what we've put forward with, in the Newsom administration, in the governor's budget, is the next phase of that. And that's something that we would implement over, several years as well, is the next set of transitions for, it's, I forget the exact number, but, 70 or so positions ultimately going from folks being on their, one of our key contractors and consultants, and then moving over to state positions managing the project.
Gotcha. So it's a lot.
I have a question on security in terms of, obviously we live in a time of, potential terrorist attacks and all that. In a high-speed rail, if trains coming by town through 110 miles an hour, that's a target for potential either domestic or even foreign terrorists, to, or somebody who wants to, maybe damage, kill a lot of people with the train. What will the security systems be to kind of protect, the passengers and also the, surrounding community too, from that kind of an event, a terrorist event?
Sure. And obviously safety and security measures, somebody gets into things we don't want to talk about too much, but there's, lots of work with the TSA and the fire marshals and others who kind of deal with safety that we're doing as we're designing the system. One of the kind of key things that's really important for, some of those safety measures is making sure that we know if somebody's, for example, accessing the rail corridor. And so that includes things like fencing and intrusion detection technologies that are part of most high-speed rail systems across the world, where if somebody has basically, say, torn a hole in the fence and come onto the tracks and is doing something nefarious, there's systems that monitor that and report that, and obviously then we would dispatch police and security forces to deal with whatever the instance looks like. There's other detection on broken rail or other things that might happen with tracks themselves that are part of sort of modern rail systems that we're implementing on the program. And then of course nothing is 100% foolproof, so there's nothing that no system that can work in all instances, but we have lots of professionals and people are definitely thinking about those questions on how we maintain the safety and security, both for obviously our passengers and in employees, as well as for the surrounding communities. And that's definitely a key design consideration as well.
That's awesome. What about for passengers who are coming in and out? I have in my head, you have kind of the dichotomy between airport security and Amtrak security. Where is the high-speed rail security kind of lie on that continuum?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this will ultimately come down to what TSA tells us that we need to do, and obviously working with our operator to define that as well. What they've said so far is that they see differences between train travel and air travel, for example, and so which is pretty understandable. I think that's common around the world, and so I certainly don't expect the kind of full airport take off your shoes and belt and that kind of stuff in terms of security screening, whether it'll be purely just a show up and walk onto the train as most of our rail services are today or not, or something sort of somewhere in between, I think is still something that will have to be determined as we get closer to operations. We do see kind of around the world that there is some variation between essentially just to show up and get on, and obviously with some folks who are doing monitoring and other things for suspicious activities, but less screening, to something more like a metal detector that you walk through on the way to the train that is a lot less than what you do at an airport, but more than just a no screen at all. So I think we'll see as we get closer, but those are the somewhere in that range of possibilities is a pretty likely result.
Let's follow up on some of the questions we have for the South County specifically. I mean, what's the EIR report was just released, I think, last month. What is sort of maybe some of the key points of the EIR report for Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy? What are some of the highlights, would you say, from that report for this specific area?
Sure. So the report covers the entire project section for us from San Jose, so Scott Boulevard in Santa Clara, all the way through the Pacheco Pass out to Carlucci Road in Merced County. There's a specific Morgan Hill to Gilroy subsection within the documents, and so for those in the communities who might want to just really focus in on the South County area, those would definitely be the places to look. And what the EIR does is it lays out the 4 alternatives that we've studied for different route options they vary the most in sort of the Gilroy area in this part of South County, as well as what the impacts are of those different alternatives across a more than one handful of different areas of different effects, as well as the proposed mitigations for how we're proposing to deal with those different effects under each of the alternatives. And so, those are all kind of spelled out, and, folks can react to all of it. I guess the other thing I'll mention that we did at the fall of last year was our board of directors identified the preferred alternatives for our 2 Northern California project sections. And so what the board identified as the preferred alternative for San Jose to Merced, and this is laid out in the EIR as well, is what's called Alternative 4. And what kind of distinguishes that alternative from the other ones is in this part of the corridor, it proposes to extend that electrified blended system where we would be sharing tracks and infrastructure with Caltrain, which right now ends in San Jose, all the way down the existing rail corridor to Gilroy before coming back onto a dedicated just high-speed line, basically, to get across the mountains. And what that does is obviously minimizes some of the impacts of building a whole new rail corridor in this part of the county and the region, but it also allows for potentially in the future Caltrain to serve South County on a more regular basis. So while we have a station in Gilroy for Morgan Hill, for example, we don't have a stop there, but Caltrain does. And so with Alternative 4, obviously those are their future decisions to make, whether they would want to increase service or whatnot, but they would have the opportunity and the infrastructure to do that. And so those are some of the reasons that the board identified it as the preferred alternative. Now, that's not a final decision because we do look at all 4 alternatives equally. We'll get feedback on all of them. And then ultimately, as the board certifies the final environmental document, they'll make the determination of which one are we going to basically decide is our project and move forward with. But those were certainly, I think, important features for South County to be thinking about in terms of what their preferences are.
In terms of the Gilroy station, there'll be a massive garage, I understand from that. How will that impact I believe it's going to be in the downtown area, around the downtown area. How will that impact the community and also, the traffic flow and those issues that are going to happen if that's built?
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at some of the traffic effects and some of the parking need at the station. I don't know that it's a massive garage that we need to serve the passengers. Obviously, our preference would be that people take transit and other modes to get to the station. But obviously, some people will drive and maybe we'll drop off, or maybe we'll end up parking. And so some of that will be continuing to work with the city in terms of the surrounding land uses and, how do we best get people to the station and serve the downtown area. If that's, we have 3 of the alternatives use the downtown existing Caltrain station. One of them has an East Gilroy station, but assuming the downtown station is the one that we ultimately end up with, how does that work in terms of what growth the city might want to see in that area, as well as what our needs might look like. And so we've been doing some stationary planning work that we're in the process of re-kickstarting with the city of Gilroy to really look at that downtown core. They just updated their overall general plan, except for the downtown area. And so it's a kind of an opportunity as our plans have become more defined and as the city has define the rest of what they view as their future for the general plan, for us collectively to zoom into the downtown core and see how both our plans and what the city might want to do can work together and have both a successful high-speed rail station as well as, of course, a successful and growing downtown.
Yeah. I was talking to some community members this morning, and they expressed their concerns, especially about the rail going through the center of downtown and kind of sealing off certain sections of neighborhoods, especially with the kind of high volume of train traffic that they're going to receive. How are you going to be able to kind of fit this train seamlessly into the downtown without blocking people off and kind of sealing neighborhoods off of the
Sure.
community?
And certainly we have heard some of the concerns from folks talking about different sides of the corridor and the downtown area in Gilroy, and we'll be responding to every comment that we get on all of those issues, of course, in the EIR as well. So I don't want to prejudge some of that too quickly here. But one of the things, we have 3 different alternatives that go to a downtown station, and so you can see the trade-offs between them evaluated in the EIR. So alternative 1 basically has the rail corridor on a viaduct above the existing streets. That means that you have the least amount of disruption on the ground. Alternative 2 proposes grade separations so that all of those streets go either up or down, over or under the rail corridor. But it requires a lot more space physically on the surface. And then alternative 4, which is that blended alternative, tries to use as much of that existing rail corridor as possible. And so by trying to use the existing rail corridor, we minimize some of the land that we need because we're, as much as we can, squeezing into what's already there. as well. We're maintaining and modernizing all the grade crossings to basically improve the safety of those relative to what's there today. But we're not grade separating. And so those are some of the trade-offs that you get between these different alternatives. And of course, which one do you think is the better one, or which of those is more important to you will vary, we have one view based on sort of the global composition of things, but others can, of course, disagree with us on that and can help us define how we can improve some of those things. I think the last part I'll mention, just because you brought up train volumes, what we look at in terms of the environmental documents is the worst case scenario, far out, sort of everything's gone great. We've built the entire system to Los Angeles, train service has really ramped up. What's the maximum effect that we might have? And the reason that we do that is because, okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. The reason that we do that is that gives us, if we end up, for example, running less service, well, we just have less effect, and so we've over mitigated. But that's, we'd rather do that than have less mitigation than necessary if we were to look at something lower. And so I think the thing that sometimes gets lost in some of these conversations is, well, the analysis is based on this, far off maximum, impact future, which then drives the maximum mitigation, which is a good thing. And, I think communities would prefer that we did that than we didn't. But obviously the path to that service being realized, there's, ways to go between here and there. I mean, we're talking about 10 years for the construction and just the start of service. There's many more years between that now and that, ultimate buildup of service, and who knows what the world will look like by that point. But that's kind of how we do these things and design these projects to make sure that we're responding to the effects as far as we can possibly see them.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. Now, I know a lot of community members are really concerned about noise as well as disruption and the look of the thing. And a lot of people have said they think that based on the reports, that the reports actually underestimate the noise and the vibration. Do you have any way to address that? Do you think that that's a valid concern?
I mean, I think we've done all sorts of noise studies, and those are reported in the EIR. And so, what I would say is, if they feel like we got something wrong, then we would appreciate comments and feedback on where that might be and what we might have gotten wrong. The thing I will say about noise varies by different alternative in different areas, and with mitigation measures like sound walls, and it depends on it's very kind of location specific in many ways. The kind of other opportunity that exists that we don't assume happens is when we upgrade those grade crossings. One of the kind of key parts of noise from rail service is if there are grade crossings, the train horn, right? That's the loud part of trains going by, and there's a thing called quiet zones, which if you basically upgrade the grade crossing, a city or a local jurisdiction could choose to apply for, which then allows trains, assuming that you have sort of safety infrastructure in place, to then run without blowing their horns. Now, that's something that's a relationship between a city and the Federal Railroad Administration, so we as a rail agency are not in the middle of those negotiations, but the safety modifications that we're proposing for all the grade crossings and, for example, Alternative 4 would be the needed infrastructure that's commonly needed to apply for a quiet zone. So there are other ways, obviously there's things that we can do in terms of mitigations, and we've proposed those in regard to noise. And then there's additional things that the cities can, if they choose to, pursue as well, that we can help facilitate with them.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good, those options.
So I have a question on eminent domain. Obviously, you haven't finalized the track yet, or the route yet. But in terms of eminent domain, what's the process once that's all finalized? And how are you going to deal with people who are, families, generation after generation, potentially having a train coming through their backyard? What's the process of eminent domain, particularly for the South County region?
Well, I think one part is the first step, and that's what, the key steps that we're at right now is minimizing how many properties we need. And so, for example, again, and not to keep beating this dead horse, but using the existing rail corridor means that we need fewer properties, right? Because there's already rail there, and it's less. We have fewer property effects in that alternative. But to kind of go off a little bit of the experience of what we've had to do in the Central Valley, where for just this first part of construction, the 119 miles that we're building right now, we've needed about 2,000 parcels of land in order to build that, and we've acquired. It's close to, I think, 80 or 90% of that at this point. So we've got lots of experience, and our right-of-way team has gone through. And the goal for any of these right-of-way acquisitions, of course, as we're ultimately trying to find ways to work with those property owners and basically end up reaching contractual arrangements with them for the purchase of a property that we might need for the project. We try to minimize the use of eminent domain unless we have to. For example, if a property owner is simply not willing to work with us, and that's the only other recourse that we have in order to get there. And there's the right-of-way process is heavily regulated both at the state and federal level in terms of the steps that we have to do as an agency, that what we have to show what the relationship looks like with the property owner. The kind of general process starts with us doing an appraisal of the property, and then helping the property owner and even paying for them to do their own appraisal of what the property might be worth that we need from them, and then we end up negotiating basically between those two amounts and trying to figure out the arrangements for what the just compensation basically looks like for the property that we might need. And so that's certainly a process that all of that starts to happen after we have environmental clearance, so after we have a specific project, and especially as we advance some of the design to have a little bit more precision on the right-of-way need for the system. And we certainly have right-of-way effects under all of the alternatives. We have to buy land for the rail corridor. But we also have quite a bit of lessons learned and quite an experienced team who's been doing that in the Central Valley, that when it's time to do that here, we'll be able to transition to working with local property owners here as well.
I apologize for that interruption of the phone call. So, Isabel, you have any final questions?
I think it might have been a year or two ago, Governor Newsom said that there was too little oversight and not enough transparency on this project. How do you think in the last couple of months, year, how have you come to address this, and how does the public review kind of feed into this kind of ability of the public to say, hey, this is what I think about this train project that's really going to affect my community in a big way moving forward?
Sure. I mean, I think we always as an agency strive to be clear and transparent with the public in terms of what we're doing. I think as the Newsom administration came in, they kind of doubled down on that even more so. And I think our current CEO, Brian Kelly, he's also had that as one of his mantras, is that we want to be incredibly clear and, in terms of where the program is at, what are the challenges that we face, what's in front of us, how are we making decisions. All of that, is something that obviously we have lots of big things that we have to do, but we want to make sure that, both the public, the legislature, and press, whoever else, has eyes on all of those things and how the program is doing. And so that's sort of a mantra across the agency. Particular steps, we have a finance and audit committee that kind of has all of the financial reporting that, lots of, in the legislature, those are questions that they tend to ask us. These kinds of public processes, in the regions as we release the draft environmental document, obviously this is a public, formal process that we're going through, and it lays out all of the work that's been done over the last, 10 years looking at all of these different routes. What we've also tried to do is make sure that, we are reaching people during the public comment period. And so it was, while we were planning to host in-person open houses and other things, when COVID hit, our team did a pretty remarkable job of quickly transitioning all of our engagement to online and similar, webinar formats. And so we launched the website at www.meethsrnorcal.org, which is our online open house tool for the San Jose to Merced EIREIS. It has all the information that would be available at an in-person open house, but in an online format. We held online open houses that basically drew the same number of people that we had at our in-person open houses that we had last year. We did office hours. We did a public hearing. I mean, we're doing everything we can, and you're helping us hopefully get the word out as well. That the draft EIR is on the street. But those are the things that we will continue to do, and we have a pretty remarkable, I think, outreach program that has been able to take on. We started this conversation with the size of the region, and that's certainly one of the scale is part of our challenge. But we are in these communities. We have talked to property owners. We've talked to the local jurisdictions. Anybody interested in sort of hearing from us, and then us hearing from them. We've certainly been out and trying to engage with them as we've been going through the process, and we'll continue to do that. And obviously, we're ultimately a public agency, and we have public obligations, and transparency is one of those. And I think you have a pretty strong commitment from sort of the leadership on down that's a big deal for this project.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's good to have these resources as well, because as press, our job's to connect people with the resources they can go to when they're submitting answers for the public review. I have kind of my last question. I want to know, what does this project mean to you? I know you've seen it come through here over the years. What does it mean to you, and how do you envision it impacting California, and in particular, this region of our state?
I mean, I think to me, and maybe this is why I've spent now 9 years doing this, I, as ultimately, as a transportation professional, and, somebody who's studied city planning, I don't know of a different project that would have the same effect for California and our state and our region than this one. What it means in terms of connecting how Californians live and travel, I think can transform the state as a whole. Some of that maybe is even very personal for me. I grew up in the Bay Area, and then I went to college in Southern California. And, so I'm familiar with every route up and down the state, and, flying, driving, whatever else. But, when you start to talk about what it means for, Fresno to be 1 hour from San Jose, for example, rather than the 3 or 4 hour drive, on 152, or for Gilroy to be less than 2 hours to Los Angeles, that just starts to change how we are connected, how we can travel, how we can do business in the state. And those are the reasons. And of course, the other part of it is also just transitioning our, economy away from greenhouse gas emissions and away from, auto and air as being our main modes of travel towards greener options that can help us, meet our also greenhouse gas emission goals while maintaining our economic potential or growing our economic potential. That's why I think for me, I keep doing what I'm doing and trying to see this project to fruition, because the benefits are that big. The challenges are equally, daunting, but we keep moving forward and, try to take on those and make sure we preserve those key benefits that we're ultimately trying to get to.
Yeah, well, they definitely are challenging. The challenges you have are daunting. So, hey, Boris, thanks so much for your time, and you too, Isabel. So this will be on YouTube next week when we put out the newspaper for Morgan Hill Life. So I'll let you guys go. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very
so much.
Nice to meet you.
Really nice to meet you guys.